Rose was born September 16th, 1853 in New Bedford, Illinois. Hi guys. And she died here April 16th, 1936. So she lived a pretty healthy life. Her parents were Thomas and Sophia Ireland. Sarah Jane, Julia, and Ellen Nellie were her siblings. She was married twice to Mr. Miller and Mr. Samuel Vanalstine. There are no known children that we know of. Looking through her history and all of that, it just seems to me that she didn't have any children at all. In 1857, Thomas and the family moved from Illinois to Minnesota to find cheaper land, and even came further inland, another 200 miles, to land at Lake Chetek. And here, approximately, is where their cabin sat. And they have a marker there now. The cabin is gone, but they have a marker there of where the cabin was approximately. It's a big, long tour from what I understand back there. But on August 17th, this is where the story gets fun. On August 17th, and this is why I'm wearing this, the Santee Sioux Indians, 3 warriors, got a little bristle under their collar and were hungry. The crops had not been good for them that year, and the government had not come through with their payment. It was a little late. They had some, I believe the Civil Wars were going on at that time. And so they were a little late in getting their monies to the Sioux Indians. And August 17th, they started far north of Lake Chetek, way up north, and had attacked a family that had been helping the Indians all along in feeding them and giving them provisions and making sure that, peace was kept between the Indians. And they went in and were fed up, and these few warriors had gotten a little out of control and started a war by killing the family and killed them all. They came south to Lake Chetek and started at the north end of the lake, and moving south, there was 54 settlers at Lake Chetek. Now, Lake Chetek was part of the land that had been taken from them from the government, and so they were out to get revenge. They wanted to make sure everybody knew that they were a little PO'd about the whole deal. And so they started at the top and moved south, killing 20 people. And Mr. Charlie Hatch, who had been part of this, had gone around to all the other settlers and the rest of the settlers. He was kind of a Paul Revere of Lake Chetek, and had gone to all the settlers and said, the Indians are here and they're going to kill us. If we don't get everybody together, men, women, and children, and get weapons in their hands, we're going to die. So we need to gather everybody together. And everybody head to Mr. Wright's cabin, which is south, the south end of the lake. So everybody gathered at Mr. Wright's cabin with their weapons, men, children, women, the whole 9 yards, and they all huddled up in that tiny little cabin. And the Indians came in. Hi. The Indians came in, and they were sitting outside, and he says, you all need to come out of there. You need to come out now. We want you out of that house. Come on. And they said, oh, we're not coming out there because you're going to kill us. You already killed all our friends. We're not coming out. So somebody peeked their head out the door, and they says, but I don't want to come out with all these people. Can we just, negotiate here and you just let us go and let us go free, please? And so he says, Chief Lean Bear, sitting out there on his mighty horse, and he says, yeah, you can all come out. Come on, we'll let you go. So he says, if If you want to, you can go get a horse and a wagon. Load everybody up, and you can go. So that's what they did. They went down to Mr. Everett's house, and they gathered a horse and a wagon, brought it back to the cabin, loaded all the children and the women in it, and off they went. They only got about 1.5 miles out of their little settlement. And the Indians come riding up on them and attacked them. Now, thinking that the Indians wanted their wagon and their horse, they all bailed off into the little slough that was there. Now, the slough, which is now deemed Slaughter Slough, had 8 to 9 foot tall grasses in it. Grasses and reeds so thick that they would shred my moccasins. They would cut their skin. They all got down in there and they huddled down in them grasses and they waited for those Indians as low as they could go. And their father Thomas most likely had Ellen and Rose, and Sophia had Julia and Sarah, the youngest two, with her. There were 34, mind you, that went into this little slough. From up over the top of the little knoll that's there, now this is in Minnesota, so imagine it's kind of flat rolling grounds, and there's just this little slough. Up over the knoll, here are the Indians, and they come in, and they start attacking by shooting randomly. As soon as they saw a blade of grass move, they shot. And they shot, and they shot, and they shot. And this went on for 2 to 3 hours, shooting at these settlers. Killing some, maiming others. And 14 died that day in the slough. The others were threatened by the Indians who were saying, "We're going to burn you out of there. You better come out. We're going to burn you out." So little by little they creeped out, seeing that there was a storm upon them. The Indians started getting a little antsy. "Come on now, all of you out of there. We want everybody." Well, there's only 8 left out of that bunch that survived. The rest, Rose's mother, Sophia, had come out of the reeds, slowly kind of lingering behind everybody else, because she saw that her daughter, Sarah, little 3-year-old Sarah, had been stabbed in the abdomen, and she was dying right before her eyes. Julia beside her side, and Sophia came out of the reeds, and they were shot as soon as they appeared. Thomas had been shot 8 times while laying in the reeds, their father. Rose and Ellen had been untouched. They came out, and out of all of that were in the reeds, there were 8 that survived. All 8 of them, 2 women and the rest children, 1 little boy, had all been scooped up by the warriors and the Indians, and off they went. They traveled at night, they moved fast, moved often, didn't have a lot of food. They weren't welcomed among other tribes because they had moved on something that was by themselves. There were 3 other nations of Sioux, divisions of Sioux, and the other Sioux were not happy with what they had done. So they were out with the Indians for 3 months, traveled 800 miles north of where all the families had been killed, and lived with the Indians, adopted out to the different families within the tribe. And Rose and Ellen had been adopted out to Chief Redwood's family. And Chief Redwood and his family took a lot of good care of them, whereas others had not been. They had been kind of abused and starved at times. A little Ellen tells us stories of 2 and 3 days of not having food. When they didn't have enough to go around, the captives were the ones that would suffer. Their shoes were shed. They were given moccasins the day after they were captured. The girls tell of stories of being frightened and lonely and thinking that their whole family was gone, which the majority of them were. They went and settled up there in North Dakota from Minnesota, settled up in North Dakota, and 800 miles from where they were. And from there, the Lakota Indians had heard of their plight. And the Lakota Indians had said that there was a group of young men that were kind of like the Robin Hood of the Indians. If there was somebody that needed something, food or shelter, a mother without children, children without parents, they would take them in and take care of them, or make sure that they had families to take care of them. And when they heard of the plight of the captives, they decided that they wanted to go rescue them because they did not agree with what the Santee Indians had done. So they gathered horses, provisions, talk to you later, yeah. Provisions, and went north 100 miles to meet with the Santee. So the Lakotas, being friendly Indians, asked for a meeting with the chief. And here is a rendition of what that negotiation would have been like, and went in with their horses, rifles, and provisions and thought, you know, we want to trade for all of them. And when the son of the chief said, well, I'd be willing to trade my captive for horses, they realized that their captives, they would have to go to each family to trade for them. The negotiations went on for hours. Indians are not real quick in making anything happen. So after making the trades, Rose was traded for 2 horses, which was huge, and Ellen was traded for 1, which the majority of the children were traded for 1. All of the captives were traded for in one essence or another, except 1. One was there in the teepee, was not wanting, they didn't want to give her up. It was one of the women. They didn't want to give her up because she was a good woman. She cooked, she made provisions, she did good. And so they snuck her out. They got her out of the teepee and took her with them. Now this was in November. This is 3 months of living with the Indians. And these fool soldiers with Chiachu went as far as taking off their own moccasins to give to the women, realized that they all had clothes that they had had on for 3 months, which were shredded. Their clothes were rags at that point, and gave them whatever provisions they had left, which was 1 horse, 4 rifles, and a teepee. So they took provisions off themselves to help everybody stay warm. Blizzards, went through a blizzard. Took them 4 days to get them to safety, back to the white man. Took them to Fort Pierre, and at Fort Pierre, they were given a bolt of calico material, and the 2 women took the calico material and made everybody, including the little boy, a dress, because that was the easiest to do. From there, they were taken to Fort Randall, and at Fort Randall, Captain Gillipin had told the local newspapers that the captives were alive. And families, you need to come and get your children, you need to come and get your family members because they're alive and well. And so the families, hearing of this, you can imagine how much time, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have phones, they had little telegraphs. So the families came east, they went west, were given a horse and a wagon to travel in, and they all met in the middle. Rose and Ellen were shipped off to their father, who had survived being shot 8 times, and he survived another 35 years, died in 1897. And Rose and Ellen went with their father back to Lake Shetek and they lived in their cabin until they were old enough to leave. And they both went back to, they moved to Mankato, both Rose and Ellen, very close. And Rose was a domestic engineer, or domestic engineer. She was a domestic servant in two families there in Mankato. And at some point in that interjuncture, she got married to a Mr. Miller. Her father had died. Ellen had gotten married, and she somehow or another ended up coming to Montana. Not sure how. We can surmise a few things. She could have been a mail order bride for all we know. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that she could come out here. She could have come out with Mr. Miller and for the gold. There's all kinds of ways that she could have, for reasons that she could have been here. When she did get here, in 1906, she married her second husband, Mr. Samuel Vanalstine. And Mr. Samuel Vanalstine and her had a pretty tumultuous marriage. And in 1919, she petitioned and she summoned for a divorce. And 1920, yes, 1900s, he didn't do that. But he was petitioned for a divorce of non-support. He wasn't taking care of her. And so in 1920, she's listed as being a cook at the local YMCA here in Missoula. And in 1936, she died of heart disease. And that's pretty much it. Any more information that you want to know about the War of 1862, you can contact the website. It is listed in your book. Contact the website and they'd be happy to take a donation. I think it's $20. And they'll send you the DVD and it'll tell you from start to end about what happened. And they're commemorating of coming back together in later years and family members telling of the stories.